An old dog escaped from the shelter. Where he went will surprise you. On a blistering July afternoon, beneath a sun that pressed relentlessly against the fields and the cracked pavement, a frail old dog with cloudy eyes and a coat peppered with gray slips through the narrow gap in a chain-link fence. The hole is barely large enough for a pup half his size, yet somehow he manages to wriggle through, his heart pounding with a fervor he hasn't felt in years. A surge of adrenaline propels him onward, and in that moment he forgets every ache in his arthritic legs. He forgets the cold metal cage he called home for far too long. He forgets the resigned glances of shelter volunteers who feared no one would ever adopt him. In a rush of freedom that borders on delirium, he finds himself on the other side, outside, and something primal and hopeful in his spirit lights up like a spark in a long, dark room. He pauses, trembling with exhaustion, gazing at the world stretching endlessly before him. His vision is no longer sharp, but the shapes of tall grass swaying in the distance beckon him, an invitation to something unknown. Beneath that scorching sun, he takes a step forward, the midday heat radiating from the asphalt beneath his paws. The road's surface is painfully hot, but he presses on, driven by a force he can't quite name. Maybe it's pure instinct, maybe it's the memory of once having a home, or maybe it's a wild, desperate hope that he could find a place of warmth and love before his final days slip away. He doesn't realize it yet, but his escape will trigger a chain of events that no one, certainly not the volunteers frantically searching for him, could ever anticipate. News spreads quickly inside the shelter that the old dog is missing. A volunteer runs frowning with confusion, convinced there must be a mistake. She peers into each cage, waiting for that familiar muzzle sprinkled with white, the slow wag of the tail that rarely lifts higher than a few inches from the floor. But cage number 24 stands empty. A swirl of questions and a knot of dread settle in her stomach. Who left the gate ajar? How could a dog so old and so frail slip away? Disbelief and guilt wash over her as she dashes to alert the other staff. Panic sets in, because they all know one harsh truth. An elderly dog outside the shelter's protective walls faces unthinkable perils. The scorching summer heat alone could claim his life. And if that doesn't, the busy roads or predators might. There's also the remote threat of unscrupulous people who might harm a stray without a second thought. Despite that gloom, the old dog's paws keep moving, slow but determined. The uneven sidewalk scrapes the pads of his feet, but each painful step is a step away from confinement. He glances back once, hearing faint voices from behind the fences. He senses their worry, but he feels no regret. Perhaps for the first time in his life, he's choosing his own path. The sky above him extends endlessly, a deep blue canvas unbroken by clouds. He drinks in the scent of freedom, heated asphalt, the faint aroma of car exhaust, the crispness of dry grass. Each whiff is a revelation. He hobbles for what feels like hours, not knowing where he's going, only that he refuses to give up now. His joints ache more profoundly than ever, a feeling that gnaws at him with every movement. Still he keeps going, propelled by memories that drift just out of reach, memories of a warm kitchen, a soft bed, a gentle hand stroking his ears. Were these recollections real, or were they dreams conjured by his lonely heart? Eventually he veers off the main road, stumbling into a small cluster of trees, an oasis of shade. Collapsing onto a patch of cool grass, he pants heavily, his old lungs scraping for breath. Now that he's paused, the exhaustion hits him like a wave. His eyelids grow heavy, and despite the danger of collapsing out here in the open, sleep pounces on him with an intensity that cannot be fought. He dreams almost immediately. In his slumber, he is a puppy again, bounding through a bright, flower-filled yard. A young boy calls his name, though in the dream the dog can't quite make sense of the syllables. He only feels love, radiant and pure, shining in that boy's smile as they chase each other under a sun far gentler than the one overhead now. When he startles awake, the light has shifted. Late afternoon sunshine filters through the trees. He lifts his graying muzzle, unsure how long he's been asleep. A pang of thirst hits him hard, his throat dry as parched earth. He needs water. He needs food. He needs rest, but he cannot remain here. If the shelter staff haven't already discovered his absence, they will soon. At best, they'll coax him back to that cramped cage. At worst, they'll surrender him to an uncertain fate. The old dog has no illusions about what usually happens to dogs who stay too long in the shelter, unnoticed and unclaimed. Summoning his courage, he pushes himself upright and trudges onward. An unusual determination bubbles up inside him, reminiscent of an echo from his distant youth. Each footstep is labored, each movement a struggle, but he'll keep going. Quietly, he senses a tug deep in his bones, an intangible call leading him away from everything he's ever known. Whatever lies ahead, he must follow. Nightfall finds him at the outskirts of a neighborhood he doesn't recognize. Rows of neat houses stand in the fading twilight, windows glowing with warm yellow light. He can almost smell dinners cooking behind closed doors. His stomach twists in hunger. For a moment he hesitates, frightened by the idea of approaching humans. Some might be kind, but others might shoo him away or call the authorities to drag him back. Yet, the intensifying pang in his belly overcomes his fear. With careful steps, he moves closer to a row of garbage bins lined up along a sidewalk. It's trash collection day, and the bins overflow with discarded leftovers. Eagerly, he nudges one open with his nose, rummaging through plastic bags and cold scraps. Disgusting though it might be, the morsels he finds taste like salvation. A back porch light flickers on. Panic surges in him. He tries to hide behind the bin, his heart racing. A silhouette appears in the doorframe, an elderly woman, peering into the darkness, curiosity etched on her features. The old dog senses her looking straight at him. There's a tense moment that feels like the entire night might crack under the strain. But then the silhouette recedes, the door quietly closing. He realizes she hasn't tried to chase him or capture him. Slowly, he breathes again. The woman's fleeting glance leaves him confused, though. Something in her posture hinted at empathy rather than hostility. He slinks away from the garbage bin, the edge of hunger somewhat dulled by the scraps. He continues down the street under flickering streetlights, the silhouettes of homes looming quietly like silent sentinels. A random memory flits through his weary mind. A large oak tree in a backyard, a young boy perched on one of its lower branches, calling to him. He can almost hear the laughter. Could that memory belong to him? The night stretches onward. The old dog wanders block after block, pausing occasionally to rest. He sees no other strays. The town is eerily still, a backdrop of hush occasionally broken by a passing car. Once or twice, he ducks into the shadows to avoid headlights. He doesn't know exactly what he's afraid of. He only knows something inside him warns. Keep moving. At a lonely park bench illuminated by a solitary, he settles down. A gentle breeze ruffles the thinning fur around his ears. For a moment he imagines he's somewhere safe. His eyelids droop once more. Exhaustion claims him. This time the dream is more vivid. He's older, not a puppy, but not as old as he is now. He senses the passage of many seasons. There's a woman, tearful, hugging him tightly. A suitcase stands nearby. Everything blurs. The next instant, he's in the backseat of a car, pressing his nose to the window as the woman's face fades into the distance. That's the last image. He wakes with a strangled whine, painfully aware that those were real memories. He can't recall her name or if she was his owner or someone else entirely, but he recalls warmth, love, heartbreak. While the old dog drifts through the town's outskirts, the shelter staff mobilizes in a frantic search. Flyers are hastily printed with his photograph. Volunteers and staff canvass the roadsides by car and on foot. Some people suggest leaving out bowls of water and food, hoping to lure him back. Others fear the worst, that he might have collapsed in the heat or been hit by a car. Still, there's an undercurrent of hope. One volunteer, the youngest among them, refuses to give up. She recollects how the old dog greeted her every morning with a wag and a faint spark in his tired eyes. She sensed his strength, hidden beneath all that sorrow. It's that spark she's chasing now, driving slowly along side roads, peering down alleyways. She calls out softly, not wanting to scare him. She doesn't know that at this very moment, he's many blocks away, lost in dim recollections of a life once lived. Morning breaks with a honey-colored sunrise that turns the sky pink and orange. The old dog stands at the edge of a busy intersection. Lights change, cars speed by, horns honk. Overwhelmed, he teeters on the curb, uncertain how to navigate this chaotic flow of traffic. His heart bangs in his chest, and for a moment he's paralyzed with fear. Then an unexpected lull in traffic appears and he lurches forward, crossing the asphalt. One car squeals to a halt, missing him by inches. The driver shouts something out the window, but the old dog can only hear the rush of his own blood pounding in his ears. He makes it to the other side, trembling with relief, legs shaking so badly he nearly collapses on the sidewalk. A kind-faced man who witnessed the near accident approaches cautiously. "Hey, buddy," he murmurs, crouching low, extending a hand. Fear sparks in the dog's eyes and he staggers away, unwilling to be caught. The man doesn't pursue him, just watches in concern as the old dog continues down the street, each step more painful than the last. Hours blend into one another. The city's edges transition into suburban sprawl, and eventually into the beginnings of countryside, a patchwork of open fields, farmhouses, and winding roads. The dog's water shortage becomes critical. His tongue lolls, his breath rasps. He notices a small creek running near a dense thicket of trees. Dragging himself toward the sound of trickling water, he plunges his muzzle in and laps desperately. The cold rush soothes his parched throat, granting him a reprieve from the blazing sun. His reflection trembles in the rippling water. A dog well past his prime, muzzle streaked white, eyes clouded but resolute. He barely recognizes himself. Stomach rumbling, he scans the area for food, nose twitching for any scent of sustenance. Finally, he sniffs out a discarded sandwich wrapper near a hiking trail, though it only yields a few crumbs. He trudges deeper into the countryside, legs so weak he feels they might give out at any moment. Yet an unseen force pushes him forward. Something intangible compels him to keep going, as though he's drawn by the gravitational pull of a memory just out of reach. As day fades into dusk for the second time, he finds a secluded spot beneath a large oak tree, its leaves rustling in the light breeze. There's a worn trail leading into the distance, and the sky overhead is awash in the brilliant reds and golds of sunset. Collapsing onto the grass, he closes his eyes. The events of the past 2 days swarm his weary mind. The escape, the unfamiliar streets, the near collision, strangers' voices calling to him with concern, and yet that undeniable pull guiding him forward. Sleep gathers him in once again, though this time it's restless. He twitches and whimpers in his slumber, chasing something unseen. Meanwhile, back at the shelter, tension mounts. The volunteers have scoured the immediate area with no success. Some begin to lose hope. Others cling to the possibility that he's found some quiet corner to rest, that maybe someone with a good heart has taken him in. But as night descends, phone calls go unanswered, and there's no sign of a rescue or a miraculous find. To them, the dog is miles away, stirring under the midnight sky when he senses a presence. His ears perk, even though his hearing isn't what it used to be. A deer stands nearby, nose lifted to sniff him curiously. The old dog doesn't move, simply regards the elegant creature with fatigue and wonder. He can't remember the last time he was this close to a wild animal. Perhaps never. The deer eventually bounds off, startled by some faint noise. Alone again, the dog tries to go back to sleep, but restlessness drives him to stand up and keep moving. He can't explain it, but every bone in his tired body insists he keep going. In the moonlight, the path before him glows faintly silver. He proceeds, step after trembling step. The hush of the countryside is eerie yet comforting. He hears the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of small critters in the brush. Occasionally, he catches sight of a farmhouse light in the distance, but something tells him not to approach just yet. The memory of that boy, that yard, that woman, these images swirl in his head like fragments of an old photograph. He wonders if this trek is about finding them or finding something else entirely. By the time dawn breaks on the third day, the old dog's pace has slowed to a crawl. His body feels as though it might shatter from within, like a piece of old driftwood battered by waves for too many years. Yet that spark remains, flickering in his chest, coaxing him onward. He limps through sprawling farmland, fields lined with tall cornstalks that rustle in the breeze. At one point, he stumbles upon a horse farm. A stable hand spots him, leaving a stall with a bale of hay. She notes his bony frame and sunken eyes. She calls out gently, "Hey, buddy, are you lost?" He hesitates, tail low, poised to run, but she sets down a small dish of water. The dog tentatively steps forward, thirst overpowering his fear. He drinks, each lap a momentary respite. The stable hand speaks softly, "Poor old boy, where'd you come from?" But when she tries to get too close, he flinches, the trust in his eyes fracturing, replaced by a haunted gaze. In one ragged motion, he whirls and trots off, leaving the stable hand to watch him go, her voice echoing after him. "Wait, I can help you." But he doesn't stop. He only knows he can't linger. If he slows down, if he lets himself be taken in, the gravity of his own desperation might consume him. He wanders for a while, glimpsing a sign on the side of the road. He can't read it, of course, but it points to a place up ahead. Following the direction of that sign, he eventually finds himself crossing a weathered wooden bridge that arches over a lazy river. His reflection drifts below, tired, gray, determined. The landscape on the other side is more heavily wooded, the trees thick and old. A dirt path leads deeper into the woods, the canopy overhead allowing speckled sunlight to dance on the ground. The hush inside the forest is profound, broken only by birds and the occasional scampering of squirrels. The dog breathes in, letting the cool air soothe the dryness in his throat. He follows the path, weaving through trees that seem ancient, their bark gnarled and their branches stretching skyward like silent guardians. Something about this place feels sacred. The further he goes, the more he senses an electric hum in the air, like he's stepping into a realm where nature holds sway. Despite his aches, he continues, drawn by an inexplicable magnetism. Midway through the forest, a tingle runs through him, a memory flares vividly. A boy's laughter, echoing through tall trees. Could this place be the echo of an old home? He can't be certain, but the sense of familiarity is overwhelming. Then, quite suddenly, the old dog emerges from the woods into a clearing. There, nestled among wildflowers, stands an abandoned cabin. The roof sags in places, the windows are boarded up, and vines crawl across the siding. Yet a weathered wooden porch still stands, a single rocking chair swaying gently in the breeze. At the sight of this cabin, something deep inside him shifts. He steps into the clearing, the grass brushing against his belly, and climbs onto the porch. The boards creak beneath his paws. This place feels like it's been waiting for him. The dog sniffs around, unearthing a variety of scents: old wood, stagnant dust, distant animals. There's no immediate sign of food or water, but the porch provides shade, and for now, that shade is salvation. He collapses near the rocking chair, panting heavily, letting out a long, low sigh. In his dreams, if these are dreams at all, he sees that boy, older now. The boy is crying, hugging the dog tightly. A sense of heartbreak flutters through the dog's chest. Then an image: the dog in the backseat of a car being driven away. His nails scratch the window, the boy's tear-streaked face on the other side. A sense of profound loss radiates within the old dog. He stirs awake, whining quietly, the painful memory still trailing at the edges of his consciousness. Meanwhile, the day brightens and the sun arcs across the sky. To the dog, The volunteers at the shelter have expanded their search beyond city limits. One volunteer in particular, the young woman who'd spent the most time with him, has refused to stop looking. She calls local vets, posts on social media, and drives down country roads, scanning the landscape. She has no real leads, only her unshakable belief that he's out there, trying to find something. Late in the afternoon, her phone buzzes. A stable hand mentions spotting a senior dog passing through. The volunteer's heart leaps. She thanks the stable hand and changes course, heading toward the farmland. The search is still a needle in a haystack, but at least it's something. Days blur for the old dog. Hunger gnaws at him, yet he manages to find small creatures in the forest, voles, squirrels, sometimes even discarded scraps from a distant campsite. He drinks from a stream that meanders behind the cabin. Gradually, his exhaustion starts to subside, replaced by a strange sense of purpose. Each morning, he wakes with the ache of his bones, but also with a faint glimmer of strength. It's as if the forest, with its hushed reverence, is nursing him back. He's still fragile, still perched on the edge of collapse, but something in these woods revives him in tiny increments. He spends a lot of time lying on the cabin porch, gazing out over the wildflower-strewn clearing. He notices that birds often congregate near the far edge, where a broken fence stands. Deer appear occasionally, nibbling on grasses. In the quiet, he drifts into memories of the boy who once loved him. He was a puppy when they met. The boy had found him wandering near a dirt road, too, but as a frightened bundle of fur. He remembers how the boy wrapped him in a warm blanket and smuggled him home. He recalls laughter and snuggles, and the scent of pancakes on a Sunday morning. But he also recalls the heartbreak of being taken away. He doesn't know why it happened or why he was eventually surrendered to the shelter. Perhaps finances, perhaps tragedy. Humans had complexities he could never fully grasp. Sometimes he wonders if this cabin was once part of that life, or if it's merely a safe harbor. The forest stands silent on the matter, offering no explanations. Still, he lingers, ignoring the pressing need to find more consistent sustenance, as though there's an answer hidden here. One evening, while exploring behind the cabin, he unearths something. A small tin box, rusted and half-buried. Nudging it open with his snout, he finds only damp papers, illegible with time. Yet something about this discovery solidifies in him the notion that there's history in these walls, in this clearing. On the fifth morning since his escape, sunlight filters softly through the clearing, gilding the wildflowers in gold. The old dog drinks from the stream and then returns to the porch. His body is still stiff, but his eyes carry a depth of clarity, an almost mystical sense that each step, each breath is meaningful. Suddenly, a noise interrupts his reverie, a distant engine hum, followed by the crunch of tires on gravel. His ears perk up. At first, fear grips him. Someone has found him. Is it the shelter staff come to take him back? He scrambles to stand, but the effort is agonizing and his legs tremble. The rumble grows closer, and soon a vehicle appears at the edge of the clearing. The engine cuts off. A door opens and closes. Then footsteps, slow and cautious. A figure emerges from the tree line, a man, maybe in his 30s. He carries something in his hand, food. The old dog can't tell. The man's eyes scan the clearing until they lock onto the trembling canine on the porch. "Easy boy," the man says, voice hushed with gentleness. He takes a step forward, then stops, reading the dog's body language. The old dog growls low, not from aggression but from panic. The man lowers himself to one knee, setting down what looks like a plastic container. The breeze shifts, carrying the aroma of fresh meat. Hunger churns the dog's stomach, tearing down what remains of his caution. "It's okay," the man whispers, inching away from the container and sitting down on the grass, a respectable distance from the porch. "I won't hurt you, just thought you could use a meal." The old dog stands motionless, torn between hunger and fear. Eventually, hunger wins. Tentatively, he steps down from the porch and approaches the container, nostrils flaring. Inside are slices of cooked chicken, shredded and still warm. He glances at the man who remains still, hands by his sides, eyes full of kindness. The dog begins to eat, devouring the offering with urgency. He can't remember the last time he had a real meal. When the container is empty, he raises his muzzle, licking at the leftover taste. The man nods, a small smile tugging at his lips. "That's a good boy. You've had a rough time, haven't you?" His tone is compassionate, lacking any hint of threat. The old dog stands there, uncertain, the tension in his body gradually softening. Something in the man's presence is comforting, like a memory of gentle hands and quiet afternoons. They remain like that for a while, man and dog, the silence between them filled by the soft rustling of leaves. Then the man rises slowly. "I'll be back," he promises, turning toward his truck. "You stay safe." The dog watches him go, strangely unwilling to move. The man drives off, leaving a swirl of dust in his wake. Over the next few days, the man returns, each time bringing food. He's patient, never reaching out to grab or restrain the dog. He speaks softly, occasionally telling stories in a low voice. Stories about finding this old cabin a few months ago, about how he's been renovating it slowly, and how he noticed signs of a dog living on the porch. He mentioned seeing tracks, small tufts of fur. He decided to investigate, never expecting to find an old dog with sorrowful eyes. Each day, the dog allows the man a step closer. By the third visit, the old dog even tolerates a brief touch on his head. On the fifth, the dog rests his muzzle on the man's knee for a fleeting moment, a quiet surrender to this new, tenuous bond. The man notices the dog's arthritic legs, the cloudy eyes, the countless signs of age. He wonders aloud how long the dog has. "But maybe we can make your golden days comfortable," he murmurs, scratching behind the dog's ear with gentle affection. Meanwhile, the shelter volunteer who has been searching for the old dog continues her quest. She follows any lead she can, eventually ending up at a local feed store where someone mentions a quiet man renovating a cabin in the woods. The store clerk recalls overhearing him mention a stray dog living out that way. The volunteer's heart leaps. She thanks the clerk and sets off for the cabin, determined to see if it could be the old shelter dog. On the day she arrives, the volunteer steps out of her car, gazing at the rustic cabin in the clearing. The man, who is in the process of clearing debris from the porch, looks up warily. The volunteer introduces herself as a staff member from the city shelter. She explains about the missing dog, describing him in detail. The man's eyes flick over to the porch, where the old dog is now sleeping in the shade, and back to the volunteer. There's a twinge of protectiveness in his stance. He doesn't want to see the dog yanked away, confined again to a cage. Gently, he explains how he's been caring for the dog, earning his trust. The volunteer spots the old dog and tears fill her eyes. She recognizes him instantly. She takes a tentative step forward, calling his name. The dog's ears perk up. He raises his head, blinking at this new figure. There is recognition in his gaze. She was the one who offered him treats at the shelter, the one who gave him gentle pats when no one else would. Slowly, he stands and walks to her, his tail wagging in subdued greeting. She kneels, tears rolling down her cheeks, reaching out a trembling hand to pet his ragged fur. "You've been through so much," she murmurs, voice thick with emotion. The dog nuzzles her hand, but there's a weight in his posture, as though he fears he'll be taken back. The volunteer seems to sense it. She glances at the man. "I came to see if he's here and, well, I just want to know he's safe," she says gently. "He clearly cares about you." "He's been here for days now," the man answers, crossing his arms thoughtfully. "I've been feeding him, making sure he's comfortable. I'd like to keep him if that's allowed." Her eyes widened with relief and gratitude. That would be amazing. "I just wanted to be sure he wasn't suffering somewhere alone." She hesitates. "We can handle the official adoption paperwork if you want, make it so he's legally yours." The man nods. "I'd appreciate that, but only if it's what's best for him." He glances down at the old dog who has curled up against his leg, content. The volunteer's eyes well up again at this display of quiet devotion. At that moment, it seems everything is resolved. The volunteer calls the shelter, explains that the dog has been found and that he's safe, loved even. The staff rejoices. They promise to handle the paperwork. The volunteer stays for a while, telling the man about the dog's history, that he was surrendered once, perhaps more than once, that he was nearing the end of his allowed time in the shelter. She leaves out the grimmer details about what usually happens next, but the man understands. He clenches his jaw, then looks down at the dog with renewed determination. "Well, no more cages," he says, ruffling the fur at the dog's neck. "He's got a home for as long as he needs it." Night falls, and the volunteer drives away, a mixture of sorrow and relief swirling in her chest. She knows this dog will never again have to wonder about tomorrow. For the old dog, it should be a peaceful ending. But the story isn't done, not yet. Over the coming weeks, the old dog settles into life at the cabin with the man. The man repairs the roof, paints the porch, and sets up a comfortable bed for the dog inside. He takes the dog on slow, meandering walks through the forest, letting him sniff at tree trunks and chase the occasional butterfly. The dog's health improves somewhat. He gains a little weight and the haunted look in his eyes fades. Yet he's undeniably old. His days are numbered. One crisp morning, the man notices a change. The dog is restless, pacing near the edge of the yard. Concerned, the man checks him over, but physically, nothing seems amiss. Still, the dog keeps gazing toward the forest trail as if beckoned. The man, worried that the dog's time is near, follows him. Despite the dog's arthritis, he moves with surprising speed down the path. The man walks alongside, gently guiding him. They reach the wooden bridge over the lazy river. The dog pauses, sniffing the air, then leads the way forward again. They continue for what feels like miles, deeper into the countryside. The dog's breathing grows labored, but he doesn't stop. Finally, they crest a small hill overlooking a meadow. Below is a small, well-kept home with a white picket fence. A man in his late 20s stands in the yard, hammering something onto the fence. Beside him, a little boy giggles, running around, playing with a bright red ball. The old dog stands at the top of the hill, eyes locked on the scene. The man who adopted him kneels down, resting a comforting hand on the dog's back. "Is this it, buddy? Is this what you needed to see?" The old dog lets out a soft whimper. He steps forward, one shaking paw after another, toward the fence. Something about the house stirs a deep chord in him. Perhaps it's the echo of a life he once had. As they draw nearer, the man in the yard notices them. He squints, then sets down his hammer. The little boy stops his game to peer at the newcomers. The old dog's tail wags in slow, deliberate strokes and his ears perk. But there's a solemnity in his eyes, as if he knows precisely what's about to happen. When they reach the fence, the old dog presses his nose against it, looking at the man in the yard. There's a moment of recognition, or maybe it's just curiosity, but the man's expression shifts from polite interest to shock. He steps forward, eyes darting over the dog's features, taking in the scars of time and the distinctive markings around his muzzle. The color drains from his face. Without warning, his voice trembles. "Bailey." That name sears through the air like a bolt of lightning, and the old dog's tail begins thumping more steadily. Bailey, the name he once answered to in another lifetime. The man's voice breaks. "Oh my God, it can't be." He fumbles with the gate, swings it open, and drops to his knees in front of the dog. "Bailey, is that really you?" The old dog inches closer, pressing his head into the man's chest. Suddenly, the man's arms encircle him, and tears spill freely onto the dog's fur. Memories flood back. The little boy from so long ago, grown into a man. He's older now, with faint lines around his eyes, but it's him. The one who once cradled Bailey in his arms as a puppy, the one who wept as circumstances tore them apart. The little boy in the yard peers at his father, confused. "Daddy, who is that?" The man looks over his shoulder, tears shining in his eyes. This was my best friend when I was your age, Bailey. I thought I lost him forever. He rubs the dog's head, voice trembling. I can't believe you're here. I didn't know where you ended up. The old dog closes his eyes, leaning into the man's embrace. The man who adopted him stands off to the side, speechless, trying to comprehend this impossible reunion. Eventually, he clears his throat, stepping forward to explain how the dog ended up with him, how he found him at the abandoned cabin. The other man listens, tears still sliding down his cheeks. I was just a kid. My parents, we had to move suddenly. There was an accident, hospital bills, I don't remember all the details. But we couldn't keep Bailey. They told me he would go to a new home, but I never knew where he went. I tried to find him once I got older, but there was no trail. My parents passed away years ago. I never thought I'd see him again. His voice breaks repeatedly, overcome by emotion. The little boy stands there, wide-eyed, watching the grown-ups cry and not quite grasping the gravity of the moment. Finally, he approaches the old dog, gently stroking the dog's back. The dog looks at him, a reflection of the love he once had for a boy so many years ago. The man from the cabin, tears in his own eyes now, says quietly, "He escaped from the shelter a while back, wandered miles to get here." It's like he knew. The returning owner, no, the dog's original boy, now grown, laughs shakily, hugging Bailey again. He always was stubborn about coming home. What follows is a swirl of disbelief and joy. The two men talk for hours, comparing timelines, verifying details of Bailey's life. Every tiny piece fits, every memory lines up until neither can deny the truth. This old, gray-muzzled dog is indeed the beloved childhood companion of a man who thought he'd lost him forever. The grown man's little boy squeals with excitement, thrilled to meet a dog with such an incredible story. But time has taken its toll on Bailey. The excitement and the journey take a heavy toll on his frail body. That evening, as the summer sun sets in a blaze of pink and orange, Bailey lays down on a soft blanket in the family's living room. His breathing is shallow, and his eyes, though tired, hold a look of profound contentment. The man who found and cared for him is there, and the man who loved him as a child, along with the boy's new family, holds him gently, whispering words of comfort and gratitude. A hush falls over the room as Bailey's breaths become ragged. Every person present senses what is happening. The grown man, tears spilling onto Bailey's fur, cradles the dog's head. "Thank you," he whispers, voice trembling with love, regret, hope, and awe all at once. "Thank you for finding your way back." The little boy, sensing something very important, presses his small hand against Bailey's paw. "I love you, doggy," he says, tears shining in his bright eyes. For an instant, Bailey seems to summon a last spark of strength. His tail gives a faint wag, his muzzle nudges against his old friend's hand. Then with a final, soft exhale, his eyes close. The silence that follows feels like the forest's hush, the shelter's hush, and the hush of a lifetime of memories coming full circle. It is heartbreakingly peaceful, wrapped in an unmistakable sense of completion. Time stands still. The grief in that room is acute, but there is also an indescribable beauty in it. Bailey's final moments weren't in a cold kennel or alone on a roadside. They were in the arms of the boy who once knew him best, surrounded by the gentle presence of a rescuer and a brand new generation he never lived to see grow up. Overwhelmed, they each hold him, tears streaming, hearts heavy yet grateful. An impossible reunion, a journey no one would have thought feasible, all culminating in this last breath that transcends sorrow and merges into something almost sacred, proof that love endures, that some connections are so strong they can bridge time, distance, and every peril in between. Word spreads of the old dog's incredible odyssey. The shelter volunteers who had searched so tirelessly cry tears of both sadness and wonder when they hear how he found his way back to his childhood companion. People all over the area, those who'd spotted the old dog, the stable hand who gave him water, the kind woman who left him scraps from the garbage, learn of his final triumph. In that wave of collective awe and empathy, hearts soften. They share the story with friends and family, moved by the sheer depth of loyalty, the power of memory, and the limitless capacity of an old dog's love. In the days that follow, the man who once was the boy Bailey adored arranges a small memorial in his backyard. They bury Bailey beneath an oak sapling, so he will always rest under the shade of leaves and the comforting embrace of the earth he traversed so bravely. The man who rescued Bailey from the abandoned cabin attends, standing side by side with the family, tears in his eyes, a bittersweet smile on his lips. He places a small wooden plaque at the foot of the sapling with a single word carved into it. Bailey. Nobody speaks much. They don't need to. The air shimmers with unspoken gratitude and an understanding that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys are those undertaken by the creatures who love us without question. And so ends the odyssey of the old dog who escaped from the shelter. Or rather, his story lives on in the hearts of those who heard it, who found in it a spark of hope, a testament to the miraculous ways life can bring us back to the ones we love. For weeks, neighbors stopped by to pay respects, to stand by the oak sapling and marvel at the dog who reasoned just to come home. The child who now lives in that house tells everyone at school about Bailey, the brave old dog who walked miles just for one last reunion. The story spreads online too, capturing the imagination of thousands, then millions. People across the country, and eventually around the world, read about Bailey and shed tears over his determination and the final moments of his life, spent in the arms of his best friend. Some stories go viral and then fade, but Bailey's story lingers. It resonates with anyone who's ever loved a pet, who's ever felt the staggering weight of letting go. It reminds people that sometimes miracles do happen, especially when they're guided by love. The shelter sees an uptick in adoptions. People, inspired by Bailey, decide that maybe an older dog still has a story left to write, a journey worth taking. Volunteers at the shelter weep with joy each time a senior dog finds a home, believing that Bailey's legacy touches these adoptions, guiding them to new beginnings. In quiet moments, the man who first found Bailey at the cabin wrestles with the sting of loss. He misses the dog's gentle presence. Yet he takes solace in knowing he was part of Bailey's purpose. He gave Bailey refuge, a safe transition from the shelter to that final destination. In a sense, he was the bridge Bailey needed to cross from a life of wandering to a place of closure. Whenever the man drives back to the cabin, he can almost hear the soft patter of those paws on the porch, see the wag of that graying tail. He murmurs a silent thanks for the lessons he learned about compassion and the depth of a dog's devotion. As for the man who was once Bailey's boy, he carries Bailey's memory with him every day. Sometimes he sits by the oak sapling in the yard, letting the breeze rustle its young leaves. He closes his eyes, remembering the smell of puppy fur, the delight of throwing a ball and watching Bailey chase it. He recalls nights spent curled up in bed together, reading books or telling secrets, the dog's warm weight a comforting certainty. In the hush of those reflections, he feels Bailey's presence, as though the dog's spirit is woven into the wind and the rustling branches overhead. The little boy in that house grows older, carrying Bailey's story like a cherished heirloom. He tells his friends about it, writes about it in school essays, even draws pictures of an old dog standing bravely at the edge of a shelter fence, stepping into the unknown to find his human. He never gave up, the child says, eyes shining. He kept going until he found home again. Those words echo among classmates, neighbors, teachers, and eventually travel far beyond the little boy's circle, each retelling sparking wonder and compassion. There is no single part of Bailey's story that doesn't stir emotion. The old dog who dared to leave the shelter, as though answering a long-dormant call in his bones. The countless obstacles he overcame. Hunger, thirst, traffic, and the cruel summer heat. The strangers who offered water, scraps, or kind words but couldn't claim his restless heart. And finally, the man who found him in the woods, who fed him and nursed him without once caging him. Yet the story's crescendo is the reunion, an impossibility made real, where a dog recognized the voice of a boy grown into a man, bridging the years with an unwavering heartbeat. Then came that final moment. Heartbreak wrapped in triumph, death in the arms of love, a soft departure that was both devastating and achingly beautiful. It's a story that demands to be shared, and so it is. By the time a month has passed, local news outlets pick it up. Miraculous reunion, headlines read. Shelter dog finds way back to childhood owner, dies peacefully. Photos show the tearful moment of recognition, the weathered muzzle pressed to a man's chest. The world seems to pause in compassion. Thousands of people posting messages online, some confessing their sobbing, others promising to visit their local shelters, to adopt, to foster, to never underestimate the depth of an animal's love. Bailey, once a lost old dog nobody wanted, has become a symbol of devotion and hope that transcends any single life. Eventually, the story, like all stories, evolves. New viral moments appear online, overshadowing older ones. But Bailey's tale doesn't vanish. It remains like a softly glowing ember in the hearts of those who read it, and especially in the heart of the little boy who sat beside Bailey in his last hours. That boy will carry forward the lessons of empathy and unwavering faith. He'll grow up believing in the power of love to outlast even the bleakest of separations. Maybe, one day, he'll adopt a senior dog of his own, offering sanctuary because he knows every dog deserves a warm place to rest when the final chapter draws near. Every so often the grown man, the one who loved Bailey as a child, visits the shelter. He brings donations, volunteers his time, and shares Bailey's story with prospective adopters. He tells them, some might be old, some might be gray around the muzzle, but they have more love to give than you can imagine. And sometimes, they have miracles of their own to share. He sees the hesitant faces soften, sees the decision in their eyes to give that older dog a chance. And each time it happens, it feels like a small piece of Bailey's legacy lives on, breathing life into another dog's future. Late on a fall afternoon, golden leaves swirling in the wind, you might find that same man kneeling at the oak sapling in his yard, the wooden plaque at its base reading Bailey. He whispers thanks for the lessons learned, for the love that endures. The wind rustles through the leaves, and if you listen closely, you might hear the echo of soft paws trotting happily in the afterglow. Because in the hearts of those who remain, Bailey never truly left. He wandered far from the shelter, braving countless risks, only to remind us all that some bonds are so profound they refuse to break. And in that reminder, he found his final peace, his final home, leaving behind a story that will forever invite us to believe in hope, in perseverance, and in a love that transcends even the boundaries of time.